Hi, I'm AnewZ and you are watching AnewZ. Here are the headlines. Vladimir Putin vows retaliation for Ukrainian strikes on Russian air bases during call with Donald Trump. US doubles global steel and aluminum tariffs, sending shockwaves around the world. The 30th Energy Forum concludes in Baku, participants leaving Azerbaijan with fresh ideas and new partnerships. Thank you for tuning in. Russian President Vladimir Putin vowed retaliation for Ukraine's weekend strikes on Russian air bases during a phone call with US President Donald Trump. Trump wrote on his Truth social media that he spoke to Putin for over an hour, describing the call as a good conversation, adding it's not a call that brings immediate peace. The two also discussed Iran, with Putin suggesting he could help with nuclear talks with Tehran. Russian attacks across Ukrainian regions killed at least 8 civilians and injured more than 50 over the past day, regional authorities reported on Wednesday. Overnight, Russians launched 95 drones and decoy aircraft across several Ukrainian regions. Ukraine's Air Force says it downed 61 of them. Kharkiv was hit hardest. The mayor says 2 missiles and 9 drones struck the city, injuring a man and destroying a house. In Sumy, a Russian drone strike damaged warehouses and civilian vehicles, injuring 1 person. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky dismissed Russia's peace memorandum presented at the Istanbul talks on Monday as an ultimatum and suggested a temporary truce until a leaders' summit can be arranged. Meanwhile, Russia's President Vladimir Putin accused Kyiv of terrorism.
Ukraine and Russia recently exchanged proposals, but remain divided on ceasefire terms and a possible leaders' meeting. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says that Moscow should not fall for what he called Ukraine's criminal provocations. He said Russia should use both negotiations and military means to achieve its goals in Ukraine. President Vladimir Putin later said, "I agree with this." Putin also accused Ukraine of carrying out attacks on bridges in Russia's Bryansk and Kursk regions, calling them acts of terrorism aimed at disrupting the peace talks. Russia's lead negotiator, Vladimir Medinsky, said Ukraine proposed a 30 to 60-day ceasefire to prepare for a potential meeting between the two presidents. Medinsky added that Russia conveyed President Putin's view that a leaders' summit is possible, but only if properly prepared. He also confirmed that Russia is ready to start a prisoner exchange between June 7th and 9th, offering to transfer 500 people. However, no name lists have been exchanged yet. In Kyiv, President Volodymyr Zelensky rejected the Russian ceasefire memorandum, calling it an ultimatum. He said the proposals were unacceptable and that continuing talks in Istanbul without real decisions is pointless. Zelensky added that Ukraine is ready for a meeting with Putin at any time and proposed a ceasefire to help prepare for such a summit. He also said international monitoring of the truce could be discussed and that Ukraine would appreciate support for the idea from US President Donald Trump. Putin commented on ceasefire proposals, saying that any ceasefire would likely be used by Ukraine to bring in more weapons from the West. Meanwhile, Germany is stressing unity with Ukraine and the need to pursue diplomacy. Germany's foreign minister said that Chancellor Friedrich Merz will tell US President Donald Trump during his upcoming visit that Europe stands firmly with Ukraine and that no chance for peace should be missed. Germany also added that Russia's military success in Ukraine was never expected and stated clearly, Russia will fail.
Following the second round of direct Russia-Ukraine peace talks, the two sides are organizing the agreed swap of bodies of killed soldiers and the exchange of prisoners. A ceasefire, however, remains elusive.
A new round of direct peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, held in Istanbul on June 2nd, ended with little progress. The only tangible results were agreements to exchange more prisoners of war and return the bodies of fallen soldiers. The negotiations, lasting just over an hour, marked only the second such meeting since March 2022. Ukraine, led by Defense Minister Rustem Umerov, pushed for a full, unconditional 30-day ceasefire across land, sea and air. Kyiv said its proposal had been submitted in advance, but Moscow presented its plan only at the meeting. Russia, represented by Putin's aide Vladimir Medinsky, rejected a full ceasefire and instead proposed a limited 2- or 3-day truce in unspecified areas. Still, both sides agreed to exchange all sick and seriously wounded prisoners, as well as those under 25. They also committed to returning the bodies of around 12,000 soldiers. Russia said it would begin by handing over 6,000 Ukrainian remains next week. Zelensky confirmed Ukraine would reciprocate with 6,000 Russian bodies, though no timeline was given. Beyond these humanitarian gestures, political divisions remain deep. Russia continues to demand Ukraine's withdrawal from 4 partly occupied regions: Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, and recognition of their annexation, along with Crimea. Moscow also wants Ukraine to abandon NATO aspirations, declare neutrality, limit its armed forces, lift sanctions, and grant Russian official language status. A Russian memorandum also calls for Ukraine to halt mobilization, freeze Western arms deliveries, stop troop redeployments, and ban foreign military presence, steps Moscow says are necessary before any peace treaty. It further proposes ending martial law and holding elections.
Clearly deny all these Russian conditions. It say only unconditional ceasefire, which means that Ukraine is going to exactly to do this. Full armament and full mobilization and implementation of French and British troops on Ukrainian territory. That's why it's deadlock. This negotiation, from my point of view, more personal show for President Donald Trump. Both sides, interesting that Donald Trump accused opposite side for the collapse of the peace deal.
Ukraine dismissed these conditions as unacceptable and tantamount to surrender. Deputy Foreign Minister Serhiy Kislitsa stressed Kyiv would not compromise its sovereignty. A Ukrainian expert we spoke to outlined the core contradictions between the Russian and Ukrainian proposals presented in Istanbul.
The contradiction is that Russia wants Ukraine to surrender and Ukraine wants to be independent, sovereign country, democratic sovereign country. That's the biggest contradiction. Russia put on the table requests that says that Ukraine has to give away 4 oblasts, including the parts Russia doesn't occupy today. They have to Ukraine has to demilitarize, has to lead denazification, whatever it means in the Russian President Putin had. So they did not put any kind of a plan that could be even looked seriously at. They just put the plan of surrender that they want to have it right now, what they want to have right now. Ukraine doesn't have a choice but to be a shield at this point to the rest of the Europe. So what I make out of all this proposal of so-called agreement is that Russia is stalling time. They are not willing to have any kind of peace talk, negotiations, or anything like that.
Ukraine also presented a list of 400 children it says were taken to Russia. Zelensky said Moscow agreed to return only 10. Russia maintains the children were evacuated from war zones. While Russia claims to seek a lasting resolution, Kyiv accuses it of using diplomacy to buy time. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has warned the US may abandon mediation efforts if there's no sign of real progress. Ukraine expects a Russian response to its ceasefire proposal by the end of June, but prospects for a direct Zelensky-Putin summit remain slim.
The US has doubled tariffs on foreign steel and aluminum imports to 50%. The increase applies to all trading partners except the United Kingdom, as London had earlier secured a preliminary trade agreement with Washington.
In a sweeping move to bolster domestic industry, US President Donald Trump has signed an executive order doubling tariffs on steel and aluminium imports from 25% to 50%. The decision marks the second major hike since March and takes effect Wednesday. Trump says the measure is vital for protecting the American steel industry and reducing reliance on foreign suppliers. Speaking at a US steel factory rally, he argued that only high tariffs would force businesses to buy American.
If you don't have steel, you don't have a country. You don't have a country. You can't make a military. What are we going to do? Say, let's go to China to get our steel for the army tanks and for the boats and ships. A strong steel industry is not just a matter of dignity or prosperity and pride. It's above all a matter of national security, and it is.
But the announcement has stirred unease at home and abroad. Critics warn of steep consequences, higher costs for US manufacturers, potential retaliation from trade partners, and deeper disruption to global supply chains. Some affected firms expressed disbelief that the policy was going ahead, hoping it might be a bluff or bargaining tactic. The UK, however, secured a partial exemption. Its tariffs remain at 25% amid ongoing trade talks with Washington. Meanwhile, the US, already the world's largest steel importer after the EU, sources much of its metal from countries like Canada, Brazil and South Korea. This latest move reverses earlier carve-outs and exemptions Trump deemed too lenient. Though imports and US production levels had remained relatively stable in recent months, April saw a 17% drop in steel imports. Industry watchers now expect an even sharper decline. Canada and the EU are reportedly readying counter-tariffs in response.
Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum vowed countermeasures if a deal is not reached with the US on Donald Trump's metal tariffs. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney says his government is in intense talks with Washington to remove what he called an unjustified and illegal tariff increase. Brazil and the European Union reacted as well.
I think that's breaking up very rapidly.
President Trump's decision to double tariffs on imported steel and aluminium has triggered warnings around the world, with some of America's closest trading partners already preparing to push back.
So, my position on the issue of trade, on the tariff that was imposed on Brazil, the direction we have is as follows. First, we're going to try to spend as much time as possible negotiating. Secondly, if there's no agreement, we'll go to the World Trade Organization, or we'll decide to have reciprocity.
And in Mexico, officials say the move is economically senseless, pointing to America's trade surplus with them. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum says tariffs are unfair and Mexico's response will not be an eye for an eye. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney did not commit to further retaliation Wednesday morning and would only say his government is having intensive discussions with the United States to remove what he calls an unjustified and illegal increase. In Europe, the EU's trade chief called the decision counterproductive and warned that talks with Washington could suffer.
We strongly regret this latest US decision, and I explained to him that it clearly doesn't help the ongoing negotiations, especially as we are making progress.
Brussels says it's preparing for possible countermeasures, but for now, it remains at the table.
South Korea's newly elected president, Lee Jae-myung, has officially taken office following a scaled-down inauguration ceremony in Seoul. His swearing-in comes just a day after winning a snap election, signaling a major political shift in the country.
Lee Jae-myung was officially sworn in as South Korea's 21st president on Wednesday during a scaled-down inauguration ceremony held at the National Assembly in Seoul. The 61-year-old former human rights lawyer takes office after winning Tuesday's snap election with 49% of the vote. He defeated Kim Moon-soo of the Conservative People Power Party, who secured 41%, signalling a major liberal shift following the ousting of former President Yoon Suk-yeol. The election was called amid widespread public backlash over Yoon's attempt to impose martial law.
I solemnly swear before the people that I will faithfully carry out my duties as President by upholding the Constitution, defending the nation, striving for the peaceful reunification of the homeland, promoting the freedom and welfare of the people, and advancing our national culture.
Following his oath of office, President Lee outlined his administration's priorities, vowing to restore democracy, rebuild the economy, and ensure national security through dialogue and strong alliances. Conservative challenger Kim Moon-soo conceded defeat early Wednesday, offering his congratulations to the new president.
I humbly accept the will of the people. I extend my congratulations to candidate Lee Jae-myung. I will never forget the overwhelming support and encouragement the people have given me.
Thousands of Lee's supporters gathered in central Seoul late into the night to celebrate the victory. As Lee begins his 5-year term, the nation watches closely, hopeful that his leadership will bring stability, unity, and renewed momentum to South Korea's future.
Aid distribution centers run by the controversial US and Israel-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation were shut down for the day after dozens were killed near one of the sites in the Strip. The Israeli army says it now considers the roads to the hubs as active combat zones.
Aid delivery in Gaza was suspended on Wednesday after at least 27 Palestinians were reported killed near a food distribution site in Rafah. The deaths, confirmed by Gaza's Hamas-run civil defense agency and the International Committee of the Red Cross, followed days of violence around US-backed aid centers. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF, which is supported by the US and Israel, said the one-day closure was for logistical improvements. But the Israeli military declared roads to the centers combat zones and prohibited civilian access. According to the Israeli army, its troops opened fire on individuals it described as suspects who left designated access routes near the aid site. It did not confirm directly targeting civilians, but hospitals in the area reported gunshot wounds among those injured while waiting for aid. Aid workers and witnesses described the scene as chaotic, with no crowd control or ID checks. This was the third such incident in as many days. Previous clashes on Sunday and Monday also left dozens dead, according to UN monitors and local authorities. The GHF, which began operations last week, runs its own distribution system outside of the UN network. It relies on US contractors to manage secure centers inside Israeli-controlled zones. Critics say the model is unsafe and forces civilians to walk long distances through conflict areas to collect food. The UN and other humanitarian groups have refused to work with the foundation, calling the approach unaccountable and dangerous. UN officials said the current setup puts lives at risk and described it as a model for how not to deliver aid. Despite growing concern, Israel insists the GHF allows aid to reach civilians while avoiding diversion by Hamas. The foundation claims it has delivered over 7 million meals so far. The United Nations Security Council is also expected to vote on a resolution demanding an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, along with unrestricted humanitarian access. The draft calls for the release of all hostages and the lifting of all restrictions on aid delivery. It remains unclear whether the US will back the resolution or use its veto.
This is a deliberate denial of...
The UN is warning of a worsening humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan as international aid remains frozen. It says $145 million in food aid projects are now at risk of being suspended. For more on that, we go to Kabul and our Tamim Bahis.
The United Nations is raising serious concerns about the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan as international aid to the country remains suspended. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says the funding freeze will force the suspension of $145 million worth of aid projects, most of them focused on food assistance. According to OCHA, the aid would also lead to the closure of more than 420 health centers and 298 nutrition centers, cutting off essential services to millions across the country. While nearly 23 million Afghans need humanitarian support this year, OCHA says it can only reach 16.8 million under current funding levels. The agency is now appealing for $2.42 billion to meet the full scale of the country's needs. In response to the growing crisis, the UN Security Council has announced a meeting for June 23rd. The session will include briefings from Rosa Atunbayeva, the UN Secretary General's Special Representative for Afghanistan, and senior officials from the UN Women and OCHA. The meeting will feature an open briefing followed by closed consultation as part of the Council's regular quarterly review on Afghanistan. With millions at risk, the outcome of the meeting could be crucial for Afghanistan's humanitarian future. This is Tamim Bahiz in Kabul for AnewZ.
Syria's interim president Ahmed al-Shara is set to visit the United States in September and deliver a speech at the UN, according to Syrian media outlets. This would mark the first trip by a Syrian official to the country in 6 decades. The news of the visit comes just weeks after US President Donald Trump announced the end of American sanctions on Damascus. On al-Shara's visit to the US in 3 months' time, we're speaking with John Kavik, senior editor at The Issue Insight, coming to us from New York. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, as the Western sanctions are being lifted on Damascus, how much would you say al-Shara's visit to the US and a speech at the UN General Assembly would mean for Syria's efforts to return to the global stage?
It's incredibly important, primarily because it will physically place the president of Syria at the UN podium during the General Assembly. He will then be able to take his seat at the table where the Syrian delegation would sit and listen to the speeches of heads of state and heads of government. Most importantly, though, will be the fact that he will be able to be seen with President Erdogan of Turkey, with Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, with the Qataris, with the UAEs. He'll be seen with all those people as they'll basically be shepherding him in. And then it also makes much easier for other heads of state and government, particularly in Europe, to use the opportunity for pull-asides and bilaterals. So it's very, very important.
How would you describe the path that Syria's new leadership is taking, considering all the current circumstances? We've also heard the EU has announced, has lifted some of the sanctions. What do you believe that al-Shara will achieve by acting this way?
Well, during the next 3 months, it's full of opportunity, but also challenges, because in some respects, there's a clock that now has begun ticking until mid-September when he speaks. And that clock is about what does Syria look like today and what's it going to look like in 90 days. So he's got work to do because he needs to continually show, leading up to the UN General Assembly, that Syria is changing. One of the big challenges, though, for him is going to be there are people in Syria who don't want these changes to be successful, who don't want him to be successful, who want Iranian influence to return to Syria, and simply don't want the type of government that they feel he's creating. So he's going to have to manage that. But it's the optics that are going to be incredibly important. And his speech, he will be able to say, he may do something dramatic that now is the time for Israel, the state of Israel and Syria, to reconnect, to establish formal diplomatic relations. He may also say, as a message to Israel, as a message to Turkey, this is a time for countries to leave the territory of Syria. This is a time for our boundaries to again be our own. So he's got, like I said, a lot of opportunities, challenges, but it's simply the optics of him showing up, which is going to be incredibly powerful.
Well, John, thank you so much for joining us and providing your insight.
Thank you.
In other news, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, rejected a key Washington demand in its proposed nuclear deal with Tehran. Our Tura Shiralilu has the details.
Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, said Wednesday, a U.S. proposal on nuclear enrichment to reach an agreement with Iran is against the country's national interests. Addressing a gathering to mark the 36th death anniversary of Ayatollah Khomeini, the leader of the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei said the U.S. proposal is 100% against the revolution's objective of independence. He said enrichment capability is the cornerstone of Tehran's nuclear program and its peaceful applications, adding that earlier Iran has tested lack of reliability of the U.S. to maintain its enrichment rights. The U.S. proposal was relayed to Iran last Saturday by the Omani Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi, who has been mediating 5 rounds of indirect talks between the Iranian and U.S. negotiators since April. Tehran says it's preparing the response to the proposal based on its unnegotiable right to enrichment, while unconfirmed reports said the U.S. has suggested a zero enrichment or a consortium to enrich uranium by Iran. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, in an interview with the Egyptian TV Al Qahira News, said Iran and the U.S. have serious differences in the talks, but it does not mean a nuclear deal is impossible. Araghchi, who was in Cairo on bilateral visit on Monday, also met the IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi. He dismissed the UN watchdog agency's recent report on Iran's nuclear program and told Grossi that IAEA should act independently from political pressures. Tura Shiralilu, reporting for AnewZ TV, Tehran.
More than 1 million Muslims have gathered in the holy city of Mecca for the annual Hajj pilgrimage. Hajj is a sacred duty for Muslims and one of the central pillars of Islam.
Under Mecca's night sky, the annual Hajj pilgrimage begins, a sacred duty for Muslims, and a moment that connects millions to a journey made by the Prophet Muhammad more than 1400 years ago. As the 5th pillar of Islam, Hajj is a religious duty required once in a lifetime for every physically and financially able Muslim. Pilgrims pray around the Kaaba, Islam's holiest site, at the Grand Mosque in Saudi Arabia's holy city of Mecca. It occurs in Dhul Hijjah, the final month of the Islamic calendar. For those who arrive from cities, villages, refugee camps, it's the culmination of years, sometimes decades of longing.
I have wanted to come here for a long time to see the Kaaba. This is the first time I see it, and I am very, very, very happy. Praise be to God.
By God's grace and mercy, we were able to be among those who came for Hajj this season, and this was the greatest gift from God for us. Hajj came at the right time, so we can pray for our people in Gaza.
More than 1.8 million Muslims are expected this year. Pilgrims often save for years to make this journey. For them, Hajj is more than a ritual. It's a transformation, a moment of closeness to God and to each other in one of the holiest places on earth.
A new investigation by The Insider reveals how Russia's military intelligence, the GRU Unit 29155, orchestrated a disinformation operation using forged leaks, fake personas, and international journalists with Azerbaijan cast as the villain. Now, nearly 8 years later, the truth is beginning to unravel.
In 2017, headlines in Bulgaria and beyond accused Azerbaijan of secretly delivering weapons to Syrian terrorists aboard diplomatic flights. The story, pushed by Bulgarian journalist Dilyana Gaitangieva, sparked outrage. Her report claimed that 350 Silkway Airlines flights, protected by diplomatic immunity, were carrying arms to war zones, from Syria and Afghanistan to Africa. Dilyana's so-called exclusive quickly gained traction. Shared by WikiLeaks, amplified by Julian Assange, and promoted by pro-Russian voices, it seemed to expose a vast covert network involving Western intelligence, Gulf states, and Azerbaijan. But it was all a lie, or more precisely, a Russian operation. In 2025, an investigation by The Insider, authored by Roman Dobrokotov, Christo Grozev, and Michael Weiss, traced the original leak to GRU Unit 29155, the same Russian military unit linked to poisonings, sabotage plots, and global subversion. The fake whistleblower behind the leak, a fabricated persona on Twitter at @anon_BG, created by the GRU.
What we discovered was truly shocking. It turned out that over the years, many of the disinformation operations that had previously been attributed to other parts of the GRU, or even to the FSB and the Foreign Intelligence Service, had in fact been carried out by this same unit. A significant number of their disinformation campaigns had been designed to cover their tracks, covering up assassination attempts, sabotage operations, and actual killings or explosions.
The goal: discredit NATO allies, stir anti-Western sentiment, and frame Azerbaijan as a tool of the West in Syria's war. The documents were sent to Dilyana via this fake GRU account. The Silkway story was a masterpiece of Russian disinformation.
There is a clear correlation between what they do on the ground, attempted murders, real assassinations or bombings, and what they do in the cyber and disinformation sphere. It has also become clear that many journalists around the world who work with them know exactly who they're working for. Others might not know at the beginning, but eventually they either figure it out or are told directly.
The documents, flight records, diplomatic notes, and weapons manifests were later found to be either forged or selectively edited. GRU successfully injected fake stories into Western media via intermediaries like Gaitangieva, who published the Silkway Airlines story in Bulgarian newspaper Trud. Russian state media amplified the claims, and Azerbaijan's reputation took the hit.
There is one journalist for whom we gathered enough evidence to name her explicitly in our report, Dilyana Gaitangieva. Personally, it was very difficult for me to include her name, because over the years, yes, we've had online conflicts, and I've disagreed with the conclusions she's drawn, and the platforms where she's published her so-called investigations. But I always assumed that her motivation was ideological. It turns out it was not. It turns out she has in fact worked for what is probably the most terrifying department within Russian intelligence, one composed entirely of killers, people whose mission is to eliminate opposition figures, so-called traitors, and global competitors of the Kremlin.
The operation's reach extended beyond print. In 2017, WikiLeaks shared her interview, calling her firing pathetic. Assange himself publicly defended her, repeating claims that Western powers and Saudi Arabia were secretly fueling jihadist violence. Now, analysts say WikiLeaks became an amplifier for GRU propaganda, knowingly or not. The entire narrative was built on disinformation. There was no verified evidence that Azerbaijan violated arms control treaties. In fact, the accusations served Moscow's broader strategy: divide NATO, discredit their partners in the Caucasus, and shift blame for Syria's chaos away from the Kremlin and its ally, Bashar al-Assad. After her dismissal, she began cooperating with pro-Kremlin media, participated in events sponsored by the Russian Ministry of Defense, and actively promoted other conspiracy theories, including those about biolabs in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukraine's intelligence service SBU flagged Gaitandzhieva as a probable GRU asset. In 2023, her name was listed in the Ukrainian Mirotvorets database. Critics in Bulgaria say their government ignored Ukrainian warnings.
Her relationship with this GRU unit dates back to before 2017. We can't pinpoint exactly when it began. All we know is that formal contact between representatives of the unit and Gaitandzhieva herself took place via a private Twitter chat in June 2017. And by that point, their relationship had already been ongoing for at least a year. I believe that these ties may have since ended, as we've seen no communication over the past year between her and members of the unit.
In the years that followed, GRU's fingerprints showed up across Europe in poisonings, sabotage, cyber attacks. But this case, the Silkway Airlines hoax, reveals something more subtle. Not just a bullet, but a narrative. Not a bomb, but a story, told with forged emails, fake leaks, and real journalists. And Azerbaijan? Just collateral damage in Russia's disinformation war, or something more deliberate? The headlines may have faded, but the scars of disinformation remain. For journalists, it's a cautionary tale. For states like Azerbaijan, a lesson in information warfare. And for the world, a reminder: not all propaganda screams. Some whispers, in footnotes, tweets, and forged flight logs.
The 30th Baku Energy Forum has wrapped up. Over the course of 3 days, the most pressing issues on the global energy agenda were discussed.
The 30th anniversary Baku Energy Forum has ended. For 3 days, Baku became a key centre for global energy talks. Participants discussed everything from climate policy to new technologies. After COP29, the event showed Azerbaijan's rising role in climate and energy diplomacy. Holding the forum during global uncertainty made it even more important, helping to strengthen international cooperation.
So we already see a good progress with Azerbaijan business, with the private businesses who invest in Azerbaijan, developing the infrastructural projects, developing the renewable projects, going into the advanced solutions such as biomethane, for instance, and the other green solutions important for this market.
Innovation wasn't just about technology. Important energy projects were also highlighted. For example, ACWA Power presented the Zizi Absheron wind power plant, with the first 80 megawatts expected to start working in August.
Currently, Aquapower is the biggest private desalination water company in the world with 9.5 million cubic meters per day generation. And we would like to bring this expertise to this region because not only energy security is important with the climate change, water security is as important as energy security, and we would like to bring our expertise to Azerbaijan and further on to the region in our water desalination. Furthermore, we would like to develop more projects in Azerbaijan in wind, offshore, and solar and battery storage projects. As to the region, in Uzbekistan, we have been working extensively.
SOCAR is also focusing on renewable energy. The company plans to use new battery technologies based on sodium ion and vanadium, which are more flexible and eco-friendly. At the same time, Azerbaijan's natural gas exports to Europe are growing. So far, 47 billion cubic meters of gas have been sent through the Trans-Adriatic pipeline. 39 billion of that to Italy. BP highlighted digitalisation as key to safer and more efficient energy production, with the Azeri Central East platform showcasing the latest technologies. After 3 days of active discussions, participants are leaving Baku with fresh ideas and new partnerships. The 30th Baku Energy Forum showed that Azerbaijan remains a leader in energy transformation and is moving confidently toward a greener future.
The Caspian Oil and Gas exhibition in Baku has officially concluded after gathering nearly 300 local and international companies to showcase the latest and smartest across the energy sector.
The Caspian Oil and Gas exhibition concludes today. Over the past 3 days, nearly 300 local and international representatives, including 35% first-time participants, presented their interests and priorities in the energy market.
These 3 days, today is the last day, we even have had many B2B meetings. Many companies approached our stand. And really we see that what we had spent money for participating here in our time really pays back now, because the list of new communications, new contracts, or already 2 contracts are almost signed, and companies provided interest to our organization.
With more than 70% of the exhibitors coming from abroad, the event once again highlighted the sustained international interest in Azerbaijan's energy sector.
We would love to develop our business in Azerbaijan and also the other countries, to be placed with our customers, our collaborates. This is so important for us.
We are getting good response from the new clients in the Azerbaijan. And even our clients who connected with us, they are also happy to see us in the Azerbaijan. This is very good expo, and this is good exposure to getting the new customers in logistics.
While some concrete partnership intentions were announced, the main focus was on open discussions around technology transfer, the energy transition, and the future models of regional cooperation.
We find some clients from Azerbaijan, and we hope that we do a good cooperation locally with local company. Customer side and for some investment side, we both gain some outcomes from Azerbaijan.
Beyond oil and gas, the exhibition also served as a platform for dialogue on renewable energy and digitalization, signaling a clear shift toward long-term strategic thinking this year.
We are well known in project cargoes, but we are not dealing only project cargoes. We are contributing ourselves, and we have a lot of kind of transportation services we give to our customers. We are located in 43 countries in the world.
The exhibition is going well. Many are interested in our products. We hope to build strong partnerships moving forward.
This year's Caspian Oil and Gas exhibition reflected Azerbaijan's continued role in regional energy discussions, covering both fossil fuels and emerging renewable technologies.
The second day of the International Conference on Colonial Ideologies and Realities took place in Baku, with lectures organized at ADA University and the University of Languages. The challenges of regions like the Caribbean and Africa were highlighted, including their limited control over their own resources and systems. Speakers highlighted how colonial thinking still shapes today's world, and the event ended with calls for enhanced legal tools and stronger global cooperation to end colonial practices.
The current arrangements, colonial arrangements in the world, including those governed by the French, the Dutch, the British, the French, of course, again, the United States and others, are all now being redefined, and we are seeking to promote the decolonization of these territories to bring them to the full measure of self-government according to the United Nations Charter.
Most of the remaining colonial territories are relatively small, and they're considered relatively insignificant. So the lobbying or the interest, the power that the people of those territories have is relatively limited, which is different from earlier periods when, for example, in the African and Asian countries, these were like big populations that were like big spots on the map. So there was more international attention to that. I think the fact that colonialism now is mainly limited to small island territories just makes them, I guess, less prominent in international affairs. So that's one obstacle, just the kind of visibility that's often limited of these territories.
Kazakhstan is set to receive $280 million from the UN Green Climate Fund to advance environmental projects tackling climate change. The funding will support renewable energy development, low-carbon technologies, and electric vehicle procurement. It's part of a broader national plan involving 7 green projects worth over $1 billion. The country also aims to expand renewable energy capacity by 330 megawatts by 2027 through a joint program with the EBRD. Polluted rivers from Armenia are flowing into the Araz River, putting Azerbaijan's environment at serious risk, according to Sabit Bagirov of the Environmental Protection First NGO coalition. Speaking at a press briefing on Armenia's Metsamor nuclear power plant, he said Iran also raised concerns about the pollution earlier this year. Bagirov added that the entire territory of Azerbaijan could be affected and called on media and international organizations to pay attention to the issue. He also spoke on an initiative put forward by 33 Turkish organizations, saying it shows that Armenia's activities are causing concern in Turkey and Iran as well. According to him, more than 900 mining enterprises operate in Armenia, including 24 that extract precious metals. Georgia has launched its first modern dry port near Tbilisi, aiming to boost trade and strengthen its role as a regional transit hub. Our Nini Nikolashvili has more in Tbilisi.
Georgia has officially launched the Tbilisi Dry Port project, the first modern rail-based container and freight terminal in the region. Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze announced its opening, calling it a major step in strengthening trade across the Caucasus and Central Asia. The dry port is being built in 3 phases, covering 28.5 hectares. The first phase, already completed, will handle 100,000 containers annually. Once fully completed, the capacity will double to 200,000 containers. Located near Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Tbilisi International Airport with direct links to highways and national railways, the port is expected to become one of the most efficient logistics centers in the region. It will serve not only Georgian port cities like Batumi, Poti, or Plain-Danak Port, but as a hub for international shipping, especially for cargoes coming from China and Far East via the Middle Corridor. The project is a partnership of the United Arab Emirates Abu Dhabi Port Group, Norway's Wilhelmsman Port Services, and local company Inveco. According to the Prime Minister, Tbilisi Dry Port will boost Georgia's connectivity, strengthen its transit role, and support economic growth while turning the country into a key regional hub. It's Nini Nikolashvili reporting from Tbilisi, AnewZ.
The cultural and scientific legacy of the Turkic world was presented at a special conference in Berlin. The event showcasing the heritage gathered scholars, diplomats, and artists.
The rich cultural and scientific heritage of the Turkic world was presented to the international community at a conference titled Contributions of the Turkic World to World Science and Culture, held in Berlin, the capital of Germany. Organized under the auspices of the International Organization of Turkic Culture, TürkSoy, and with the cooperation of the embassies of Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan and Turkey, the conference was supported by the Turkish Cooperation and Coordination Agency and the Yunus Emre Institute. Held at the Azerbaijan Cultural Center in Berlin, the event featured a high-level opening session, scholarly panels, a traditional art exhibition, and performances of Turkic music. Speaking at the opening ceremony, TürkSoy Secretary General Sultan Raev said the gathering in Berlin was more than a retrospective. It was about revitalizing the cultural bridge that connects the past with the future. Raev noted that generations from the Turkic geography have enriched human history with intellect, spirit, and aesthetic sensibility. He underscored the significance of Divani Lugati Türk, authored by Kashgarlı Mahmud, describing it not merely as a dictionary, but as a cultural atlas. The goal of the conference was not only to highlight the cultural and scientific contributions of the Turkic world, but also to reintroduce its shared heritage to an international audience from a fresh perspective.
Well, that's all we have for you for now. Thank you so much for watching, and do stay tuned to AnewZ.